I'm Matt Ullman. I'm the music guy.
Your game finally came out a few weeks ago. Like, talk about this journey of development and how your game is finally out for people to experience. How does that feel?
Oh, I'm obviously, I think just getting a title out in 2020 with the distractions and various roadblocks thrown in the way by fate and whatnot this year is a good thing. Especially because it really was harder to bring it down the stretch. As much as I've worked from home really for or had a studio facility for over a decade, working with Max on his two most recent teams in terms of Ektra and Runic. So for me, it's pretty normal, but it has been harder in that I like every month or two being able to physically hang out with a team and see upcoming concept arts, and most importantly, see content that's not going to be in for another 2 or 3 months in playable form, like looking over people's shoulders and whatnot in a dev pit environment. So I definitely miss that, and not having that has made it harder. Probably on every developer, really, because it's so much of making a game actually fun is being able to tinker with it in kind of a dev pit environment. So it definitely is harder when everything is fully purely remote, despite me being that for over a decade, like I said, which is more logical in my role in terms of nobody wants to hear a piccolo line being worked on in the office next door. But it's such an awesome team, and it's been a great privilege to be on a team where we know that we just have to worry about the game being fun, and that's like our only big ticket concern, as opposed to the dev experience can often be putting out fires left and right, and this has actually really been a great team to be on in terms of it hasn't been that. We've been able to really be developers, which has been nice. And
Matt, what about you? What do you draw inspiration from, and when it comes to the music for Torchlight?
Most of the tracks that I had to do were fairly. The thing that I needed to do was more or less defined by their role in most cases. Like we knew that my music was going to be one of the things that connected the IP with Torchlight the most, and so I kind of had to keep things stylistically more or less close to what they were in Torchlight 2. We wanted a reference to the title theme, the Smetana thing that I did in the opening of Torchlight 2. We used again this time with like a real brass arrangement on the sequence where you select your character. So a lot of the functional aspects in music, we knew what we needed going in. We knew we needed something pretty and lyrical in the towns. We knew we needed the up-tempo, menu stuff to start the game and whatnot, and character select stuff to start the game. But what made this title a little different was I really wanted to capture. It's funny. Everybody's mind has been on Russia with the politics, and I kind of went on a weird parallel research project in terms of what I love most about the Russian tradition, like 1880 to like 1910, and I really tried to kind of investigate that part of just the legacy of classical music and musical flavor, and tried to kind of make that the signature sound of Torchlight 3. So when you're in the main town, you hear Goosley front and center, at least 1,500-year-old instrument associated with Eastern Europe that has been around a while. You hear a bunch of smattering of some Russian composers. I really tried to kind of make that the theme for the title itself. But it's one of those things where you'll only notice it if you look for it. And it's also part of my project was trying to intentionally be a little absorb some of the sensibility behind that stuff and integrate it with my own musicality, and hopefully that worked. Aside from that stuff, in terms of background flavor, me and the brilliant Guy Somberg and my also brilliant producer, Erica Escames, really wanted to do truly interactive, dynamic stuff in action levels. And that has really been like, in terms of just being hard work, and in terms of that being something I'm proud of in the title, in terms of it kind of pushes the industry forward, for as much as this not seeming like a game that we spent 150 million bucks to do, that pushes technical levels in every way. In that aspect, it did kind of push the technical limits, and we do have a really kind of over the top. If you were to look under the hood in FMOD, you'd see some pretty over the top stuff in terms of the structures that Guy helped me, gave me the tools to put together in terms of the interactive stuff. So there's a lot of subtle stuff in the game for when you enter battle, when you exit battle. And one of the action sequences, I tried really hard to get close to the ideal of, if you're in some action levels, I really wanted the non-action part. If you're just hanging out and exploring and harvesting, I wanted the music to be satisfying and mellow and in kind of an almost townish way. And I wanted the intense action stuff to be truly intense. Like if you were battling like a bunch of uniques, I wanted the music to be significantly different than a medium intensity battle, and also very different than a no battle mellow exploration thing. And I think we actually succeeded in doing that in our action tracks. It's subtle stuff, but it was really nice to have the opportunity to do that kind of R&D-ish stuff and get closer to a soundtrack that really was truly dynamic in a way that that gamers, whether consciously or not, really want. Like I really see this project as being where I was able to have the resources to do what was kind of it's been a goal really for 30 years in interactive music, because the first LucasArts games to really use interactive stuff really were that long ago. They were trying to do it way back in like 89, 90. So this was, I feel like, the title where I felt FMOD was evolved enough that you could do a truly interactive soundtrack. And it really is interactive, not just in terms of the dynamic stuff situationally, in terms of the music being a more intense set when you're in an intense fight in those action zones. Not true in the boss zones and in the town zones where they're stuck on high intensity and low intensity. But when you're in those dynamic main action zones, we really tried to get that across and to make it a good gaming experience. We really wanted to make it to be the kind of thing where you're not noticing it. Instead, you're just more pumped up and enjoying the fight. And post-fight, instead of noticing the transition, you're more just kind of chill and enjoying our beautiful concept, our beautiful art and backgrounds, and that world. And I really tried to make the music as good as possible in terms of transitioning, not just having those two experiences be good in terms of exploring in kind of a mellow, pretty soundtrack way, and then fighting in a really kind of over-the-top, loud orc cymbals going off left and right type of way. But I really tried hard to make those transitions good. So less than the music itself, that technical part was really important to me. And I hope people enjoy. There are some things about the game that are a bit shallow, but that part is definitely not in terms of the tech, in terms of the tech we tried to put together there. So hopefully people appreciate that. And that was a big part of my goals.
So Matt, I mean, obviously you've worked on like iconic games like Diablo 2, and you've even done some music for World of Warcraft. Now that you're with I don't want to say it's a small studio, but just a different type of studio, does your workflow change at all when it comes to that? I mean, obviously Blizzard was a huge, gigantic company, making these huge games, even in the mid 90s. And like now you're in Torchlight 3, which is there a different like kind of workflow or like kind of way you do your music when it's a different company, like not as big and I want to say corporate, I guess?
The big difference between a studio and a team like we had and a big battle cruiser like Blizzard attached to like a 20 or 30 billion market cap company is more that we have to take on smaller individual production roles and kind of be our own producers a little more. It's more we just don't have the extra dozen people that do things like line producer type tasks, making sure that a short intro cinematic that is supposed to be in a particular place is supposed to be there and giving us the heads up. in a timely fashion. So in a studio like Blizzard, there's like a dozen people that have a job exactly like that, just looking for like finesse, promo, things like that. And everybody we have is awesome and does the equivalent of 2 or 3 jobs, so we can compete with that. But it is a little tougher without having like the small army of production assistant help, and that's the main difference. I recorded our big org sessions in Bratislava in a great studio. Everything about the actual production elements should be relatively AAA-ish, but it's more a function of when you have a smaller studio, it just means that you have to wear a couple more hats occasionally, and you're going to have less of a giant machine on production details. Now, that being said, you can also be on, when you are Blizzard and you have all those resources, they only matter if somebody manages them well. So, it's I'd like to think that this team had very well managed, middle resources, not quite AAA, but definitely like a few marks, a few notches more resources than the stereotypical indie team had. So we're kind of always in that middle class in terms of production details, in terms of trying to get bang for buck, and we can't just we can't throw our hands up and do programmer art if there's some task we want, because we're not an indie team. And at the same time, like, we have to be reasonably close to AAA standards in terms of the production stuff that we do. So that's the tough part about being in any kind of middle class, right? So you have kind of the expectations and limitations of both.
Yeah, it's like when you're not AAA and you're not indie, you're like this weird space in between. I guess developers have been calling it triple I guess. It's just a really weird situation.
Right.
So Matt, going back to you, I mean, obviously as technology gets better and faster, you can do more things, specifically in video games. But yeah, I want to know if in music, is it still the same? Even though technology gets better, is it still basically the same process for a musician to create music in a game?
Well, music is really, really funny in that we, as a discipline, we use the latest technology in some cases. There were electric guitars in the 1930s. Musicians were working with digital samples in a creative way back in like 81, 82. So despite music being on like the cutting edge of technology, and I personally, we had to do a trimmed down version of our Fmod layout for Switch. So even now, in terms of just like devouring digital resources and processing resources, all you have to do is let me and Erica put a reverb patch on put a reverb process on any one of our channels, and we can shut the entire game down. We can't do that. We aren't allowed to do reverb on the fly in Fmod for that reason. So as much as we interact with like the absolute latest and most powerful technologies, like as part of what music is, or even like in the 1880s when Richard Strauss would build the big pipe organ and just overwhelm everybody, that's always been part of music. But the ironic thing about music is that you can do that, but still, Louie Louie is a more like effective tune for frat party than St. Matthew's Passion by Bach. It's not always like the most, people at a frat party don't want to hear St. Matthew's Passion, whether or not it has 10,000 times the complexity of Louie Louie. They want to hear the twist and shout Louie Louie medley. So the thing about being a musician in all formats is that you always have to keep in mind that it still has to communicate and be accessible and be entertaining, no matter what the technology is, no matter what your writing goals are. So I think that's definitely something that might be the number one thing that differentiates soundtrack careers that last a little longer than those that don't, is the ones that last a little longer are not the composers that, can sit down and dish out a fugue necessarily, or can 90% of the time can tell an oboe from a clarinet when they hear the first 2 or 3 lines. It's people that have like something entertaining they want to share. It can be, if you're happy and clap your hands. That's effective composition to make a 3-year-old do. If you're happy and clap your hands. That's great. That's what the moment entails. And so I think a lot of soundtrack composers think, oh, I gotta I got to be Hans Zimmer crossed with J.S. Bach in every moment. And no, that's not what people want. What they usually want is some kind of entertainment moment that integrates with all the other content, and that you have fun when you made. If you don't have fun when you make a piece of commercial art and you're expecting it to be an entertainment product, that's not going to land in a fun and exciting way. And so I mean, that's the thing that people forget about the technology, is you still have to be the caveman with the bone flute and the drum to to get what you want to get across.
Now I'm gonna show my age here because it's funny that back in the 90s, like video game soundtracks existed, but like they weren't really like popular or mainstream, I guess, like in that sense. Like I remember going to the warehouse, I remember that store, it sold CDs, finding the StarCraft soundtrack and flipping out because like you didn't find that stuff. It was super hard to find that stuff. Because
in Korea, maybe you did though.
Yeah, and the only thing you could do is download MIDIs. Do you remember MIDI files? Is the only way you could get certain songs from certain games because you couldn't,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and now we're coming to the point where like they're releasing soundtracks with collector's editions, and like people are listening to video game soundtracks like on Spotify and all that stuff. Like the composer's work is now getting out there, and it's more popular, and people are recognizing it as a form of art. Like, what's it been like seeing that transition since the mid '90s to now?
Well, I helped make that transition in that the sound of the 12-string back in '96 was the first time that a lot of people had heard like real non-MIDI, non-wavetable music in a game context that made sense. Around that time, Jeremy Soule also did his Total Annihilation thing with a real orchestra. So, I was part of that first kind of wave in '96, '97 that really killed the wavetable world. And, I don't know if I'm really proud of that or if it's just a technological moment that happened. I was aware of it as being something that could and should happen at the time. And I don't know if in '95, '96, every person involved in music and games saw it quite that way. But, that transition happened a while ago. And I think even with that transition, it's still kind of important to realize that, and this is actually, speaking of concept art, you're talking to a concept artist today as well as a composer, of course. This is very true with concept art either at this point, is that something that works as well as art music, individual art, as a piece of art you'd hang on the wall, as a piece of art you just, a static 2D art that you trip out on your monitor and just think, oh, that's really pretty and beautiful. That is not necessarily going to be what you want in the context of the game itself. So although it's great for like the art form to get to the point where people look at it like something like John Williams' Empire Strikes Back soundtrack or Herman's Vertigo soundtrack, where it's obviously like a high enough level art that it totally exists in a medium apart from what it was created for, that never is the goal. And it's great when it happens. It's wonderful when it happens. And it's wonderful when people can enjoy the artistry of an element. But you still have to be conscious of the real payoff is in the game itself. And that's kind of why right now I'm still working on what may be additional content, working on a couple different things related to the project. So we don't have the promotional thing on Spotify right now, just because it's such an overwhelming chunk in terms of what I eventually would want to do with a promo edit, largely because we have multiple parallel tracks and dynamic stuff that I don't really know what would be the best way to deliver in a static track for people. But that's another example where you can't, I do this stuff for the game itself. And I think that was true with all the great film composers of the past and highlights of the game soundtrack history in terms of those moments.
What about your equipment? Like with the stay-at-home orders, are you writing music and composing music at home, or either are you composing music at home, or are you going to the office to compose it?
Well, we had a really the production process of Torchlight 3 really was a global adventure. My core pieces of software that I use have been the same for about 10 years now, and that is the Vienna library I use a lot of, and I also love I love Omnisphere by Spectrasonics. It's a great synth software with just an amazing library they've been building on for 30 years, and you'll hear a lot of those two elements in Torchlight 3. However, we also had a chance to do the big live session in Slovakia, and we had a chance to do a boss fight session in Mexico City 9 or 10 months ago, which was a lot of fun. So, the technology, it's really, really easy to be a soundtrack hack guy like myself and be constantly reformatting and reinstalling your Vienna library, be constantly trying to get new samples. And for me, it's like Vienna is its own little universe. I feel like I've only really gotten pro level good at working with orchestral samples after working with them for like 20 years, as of finally like going through the articulations in Vienna in terms of a good way to do fake strings. So I think we're already at a point where the technology is more about what you know how to do with it than what it is itself. It's like you're not gonna input like a violin line with like a fake sample-based violin section and just do it in, and the AI will magically say, okay, these notes need to be this sample set, these notes need to be this sample set. That's somewhat done, but there's always going to be a amount of finesse in terms of which fake asset you want to use. And I think that's true whether or not you're writing for a live orchestral gig, as we did in the session, or you're just at home with the Vienna samples, as the coronavirus has made the last fifth of our production. Thankfully, we did our big orchestral session 2 years ago, so all that content was there before the virus hit. But obviously this summer, I can't, we didn't have the ability to do a last live thing for content. So it comes down to the ability to use things like Vienna. And it really is not so much that the technology progresses and then you grab on. It's more you need to learn how to use technology that may have been out for like 10 or 15 years.
I mean, like kind of expanding on that thought real fast, just do you, as a composer, if you have the budget, would you want to do live orchestral recordings all the time, or is it depending on the project, or like would you want to do that if you had the option to? I know that's very expensive.
The main thing I wanted in Torchlight 3 was not to have the live option, but it would have been nice to have had another price of a nice new car to spend over there to just get just to rehearse more and get better, just have a little more time with the players there. The main limitation that I felt in terms of that project was that we were really ambitious in terms of, in like the 3 or 4 days over there, we wanted to get the big orchestral title theme, we wanted to get a bunch of action music, we wanted to get our town themes, and I had kind of a mad scientist side project, which is generally paid dividends, where I really wanted to get orchestral phrases I could reassemble into action material later using real orchestral phrases. Basically take the 80s concept of the or kit and make it into true phrases in a way that could be modular and actually used, which in the context of how hard it is to do live stuff right now, seems smart. Yeah, I mean, what I want is more money means more time to take like the intonation in a track from like 90 or 95% to more of like a true pro Hollywood level. And that's just a function of time and money. The best orchestra in the world and an orchestra that's 3 or 4 notches beneath that, the number one difference between those two things is just time to rehearse and to create a sound with like the 70 or 80 musicians you have there when you have the money to make that happen. And that's great when you do. That's really the ultimate resource, though, is not, can you get a bigger name actor for the vocal part? It's not, can you get, even like this one programming ace in the background. It's really more time. Time is the great resource. And, money is time to a degree. And to a degree, time is time. I mean, the whole approach that we have with a title like this is really more about letting someone like me or Erica work on something for a month or so that the more traditional Hollywood approach might be letting 4 or 5 people work on it for a few days. So that's really in terms of the triple I thing you're talking about. What really makes a triple I game when it works good is when people have the luxury of time in more than anything else.
What's coming up next for Torchlight 3? What can you tell us if there's anything coming up for Torchlight 3?
I wouldn't be carrying around this big disgusting thumbnail if I wasn't doing live production stuff this week. Because it's gross to carry it around. So that's my teaser. Yeah, I mean, I love this team, and I hope we're staying busy on new stuff for a while. We obviously can't talk about that right now, just because it's such a release is such a hazy thing. This whole process has been a little strange in that we've had, for a fossil like me that's been around forever and remembers when, burning onto EPROMs was the way you made games, or developed them. It's funny having the early release, and it's like people pay more to look over your shoulders in the last couple months of. I mean, nothing like that existed 15 years ago, where you actually got a true behind-the-scenes thing where you pay an extra $10 over retail to peer over the shoulders of the developers in the last 2 months. That's been a little strange, but it's all right. I mean, it's everything about the business end of games changes so much, every few years that it can be a little overwhelming. But it's a cliche, but it's definitely been true all 26 or so years of my life as a dev, that the more things change, the more they stay the same.